Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to present to you our panelists or speakers this afternoon. They're going to be giving you an introduction to the world of Paul Revere Williams. We have with us today Maristella, thank you, Maristella Casciato, who is the Senior Curator and Head of the Architectural Collections at the Getty Research Institute.
You just turn your mic on.
Okay. Sorry.
There you go.
Thank you. That's better. Okay, I can hear myself. And Dr. LeRonn P. Brooks, who is the curator of the African American Art History Initiative at the Getty Research Institute. Both have been extremely instrumental in the acquisition of the archives of Paul Revere Williams and are actively developing and working on an exhibition that's forthcoming in 2025, if I'm correct. 2026. Okay. So just as a touch point, with our talks, we wanted to bring some of the historical context of Los Angeles, from touching on different points of the cultural landscape, and with the original home and original architect for this property being Paul Revere Williams, we thought it might be most appropriate for us to have this conversation. So without much ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Maristella and LeRonn, who are going to present a very engaging conversation on Paul Revere Williams. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I have been asked to be the first in a certain way. So I just want to, first of all, thank you for inviting us here and for having, giving space to talk about Paul Williams. We still have quite a work to do, but the archive, who is now, in the vaults at the Getty Research Institute, top of the hill, it's under really a good custody. I only have a quick note, remembering the time we went to visit the warehouse in the middle of the pandemic, where tubes were just kept on a tiny space. No way to open the tubes, in fact, if not in a corridor with not a great light. And LeRonn and I went several times with Karen Hudson, the granddaughter of Paul Revere Williams. And for us was really something that gave us a lot of energy, this archive, while we were in the middle of the pandemic. And it was a fight to have it coming, to the Getty, first the warehouse and then top of the hill, because of the complex situation. But after that, and maybe we will be in the conversation about that, that has become one of our most amazing, it's not maybe enough, but surprise day by day, with the catalogers and our colleagues to go through the archives. So LeRonn will give an initial, of course, presentation of Williams, and also with your Q&A and the colleagues, we want to give you more details about where the archive, the situation now, how many projects, what we have in mind, and what will be the future of this incredible endeavor in the year 2020 or something like that.
Yeah. So what we do at the Getty Research Institute, we're not the museum, we're not, and so it's a whole other institution, right? And so we're basically curators for the one of the best art history libraries in the world. When you go to the Getty Research Institute, our archival collections are some of the best in the world. And so Paul Williams being within this context is really important because he helped define what LA style is. Professional practice for over 40 years, pre-war, You know, and so he, as a figure, is really underknown just in terms of the history of American architecture, in terms of what his contributions are and the many different styles that he contributed. And so, you know, Maristella and I, you know, and so what we do is that we go to spaces where archives are. They could be in storage facilities, or they can be in artist studios, and we evaluate archives for possible acquisition to bring them in. And some of this, like we said, like Maristella said, during the pandemic, before N95 masks, we were in the storage facility looking at what remained of the Paul Williams archive. And so in that particular context, you know, we spend our lives doing this kind of thing. Why? Because it's about understanding through archives the missions of artists, the work of artists. And so, you know, Paul Williams, you know, for us was a major acquisition with USC School of Architecture, was a major acquisition because now we get to sort of try to correct the historical record. Just in terms of American architecture, in terms of who was actually practicing on the highest levels of American architecture. Because the history books I read, right, in graduate school did not include many African-American artists or architects. And so it's usually in college or in spaces like this that people come into contact with histories that they usually did not know. And so having the exhibition on Paul Williams with LACMA and Stacy Steinberg at LACMA, and you know, so we are really planning on 3 different institutions to really bring to life or bring to the public who Paul Williams was. And so in this particular image from Ebony magazine, you get a sense of who Paul Williams saw himself as, right? One of the most photographed African-American artists, I would say, of the 20th century. Paul Williams went between worlds. He went between worlds of celebrity, as he's known as, you know, Hollywood's architect, but he wasn't just, you know, working with people like Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz or Frank Sinatra or many of the people that we know associated with Hollywood style and what have you, but he was also deeply immersed in the African-American community. Born in 1894, you know, he passed in 1980. His life is a timeline of the American 20th century. But part of that timeline was very troubling. Part of that timeline dealt with American segregation, legal and social segregation. And what did it mean to be an African-American born, I would say, in the latter half of the first generation of post-enslavement? Meaning that the generation before you, it was illegal for them to read in many states. Not even really to attend college, right? That was the condition he was born. He was an orphan. He and his brother were orphaned. Right, at the same time. I mean, how many things could he have had in his early life that were stacked against him to become an architect? And that's one of the hardest things, as someone who tried architecture. I tried, right? As someone who's tried architecture, to actually become or dream of becoming an architect when you really didn't have that particular example. And so in many ways, Paul Williams is a man who made himself, but at the same point, to another point, he was actually raised within a community of builders. African-American communities were built by African-American labor, so the homes, and so there were builders in his neighborhoods, but he also had mentorship. He was a member of First AME Church since 1894. He was married there. His children were married there. He had his funeral there, right? Karen Hudson said it was from the cradle to the grave, that particular relationship. But within that space, you had mentorship. Right? You had lawyers, you had doctors, you had all kinds of African-American professionals who took these 2 orphaned children under their wing. And so when you see a Paul Williams here, right? Architectural plans. Go ahead, Marcel. Yeah.
Go ahead with this. I mean, with rolls of drawings. I mean, it's really the image drawings. I mean, going to a client or to his office. It's really the idea that's the epitomized the idea of who is the architect. And the architect in this case is a Black American. And that's the 2 things together, the profession and the way to serve, not the community, of course, but also the city of Los Angeles. It's a very complex professional life. So we need to really acknowledge all these aspects of his contribution. As very, you mentioned 95, and there is an interesting anecdote. The archive had already reached at the warehouse, and there was still, I will never forget, a short article in the Los Angeles Times say, why Paul Revere Williams Archive? They are all lost. They burned. They burned in 95. The Williams Archive doesn't exist. And I recall I took the phone and I called the journalist and say, well, partially burned. But the drawings you see here, I mean, and some of the office papers are still with us. They were kept by the family somewhere else. And now I can tell you, because I have them in front of me, they are in tubes at the warehouse of the Getty. So, I mean, up to the last minute, the reality, what is the truth about this man and his profession and the history of Los Angeles, the 95 upheaval, all that was still completely one bundle, and people could not decide the direction to take. I mean, this is one of the work that the archive has been doing. I mean, allow us to understand who is the architect, who is the professional, who are his peers, how large is the office, how many projects. We started with a relatively small inventory, more 500 approximately, and we are almost 3 times there, I mean, which tells you how much working in an archive can allow you to really, when I say surprise, discover conditions, moments in life and professional life that you don't expect.
Yeah. And so when we think about Paul Williams, we think about what does it mean to have a sort of social genius, right? Here you see him with Frank Sinatra and his daughter, who often did the interior designs of his spaces. And so and what does it mean to have friends who help you? So this is in 1957, right? In 1957, here is Frank Sinatra, and this photograph was published in Ebony magazine. 1957, Frank Sinatra says, I will sit on the same side of the table. Now, you have to realize within this context, many white professionals had never met black professionals. Right? And so Paul Williams sitting on the same side of the table as someone like Frank Sinatra or the bankers and the other kinds of, or the Hollywood executives in which he made their buildings, it was a political statement. So here's Frank Sinatra sitting at the same side of the table with Paul Williams and his daughter, having this photograph taken, and then said, we're going to publish this in a black magazine, Ebony. Right? And so you have to have allies. You have to have allies in order for you to really fulfill your vision. And so Frank Sinatra was one. When you think of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, they were. And so Paul Williams, as he was within Hollywood and really a sort of star architect at this moment, you know, Karen Hudson, his granddaughter, said he always came home. Mm-hmm. He always came home. That his professional life and his personal life, he made sure to keep those things separate. And so even though he's in the, you know, around, you know, millionaires at that time, and here we're talking in the 1920s, right? Leaders of industry, celebrities who are part of Hollywood, and Hollywood is still sort of nascent in the 1920s, right? In the 1930s, and he's working with Hollywood executives to sort of build their dream homes. Out of his own imagination and collaboration, he goes home every night to his family, right? So this is sort of the character of the person we're dealing with here. And here's Frank Sinatra, and they're collaborating together. I know the title of this talk was The Man Who Drew Upside Down. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And
this is an interesting, I mean, well, I don't think that it's only an anecdote. He writes about himself, I mean, a short piece in which he says, you know, it's difficult to become an architect in the 30s. And the professional is a tough ground, I mean, to go through that profession, but and I have other limitation, and I learned myself, I mean, to draw, I mean, because I'm forced to sit on the other side, of the table, in front, and not, close to my client, I could draw upside down exactly to make them understand, oh, this is the plan. That's how he wants to move, the different section of this house, of this building, which tells you how much he's aware of his limitation. But, he never gave up with this limitation. And actually, this is a very important images. LeRonn made clear it's 57. I would say in a certain way, I don't know how much you would agree, that Paul Williams, from the beginning of his career, 21, then he was the first African-American architect to be invited by the American Institute of Architects. We are 23, but this is 57, so almost 50 years. Many things have changed in his life. And it's interesting to follow this historical trajectory, because it's not only the trajectory of an architect and his profession, it's the trajectory of Los Angeles, it's the trajectory of this country, it's the trajectory of how the community in Los Angeles are changing. So the history of his life, professional and personal, becomes really a paradigm of the 20th century, specifically in Los Angeles. This is why, here, LACMA with us and USC, we think this will be, when it opens, and it opens in end of 26, beginning 27, this will be an exhibition that is going to reveal a lot of the history of, sometimes we know or we heard, but we never connected. We never put the context together, one and the other, and create these conditions, of a holistic narrative of life and work.
And to no small degree, Los Angeles, New Yorker here, that's transplant. Los Angeles is really a city about homes, really. People invite you over, you host people, other people host you. And so the idea that Paul Williams is working on a home, like, say, for Frank Sinatra, it really means something because it's a show place. It's also business. When you invite your agent or whoever over to it's also business. And so imagine, in other cases, not Frank Sinatra's case, but, Paul Williams is across the desk and he's, maybe I want a window over here, maybe a stairwell over here. He's doing it upside down. They see it on the left side, he sees it on the right side. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? And if the stairwell goes, from the upper corner down to the left corner, he has to do it the opposite way to see that. So this is the kind of genius gymnastics he often right? He often had to do, because he was also an entrepreneur who employed people. He trained people, right? And so if you want to become an architect and you were having a hard time getting into an architecture school, you can mentor through Paul Williams' office, if you really got the chance. But, so here we see, someone who's actually imagining homes, but if you're in Hollywood or in business, your home is also a workspace often, and he's matching their imaginations. And so, often architects right now, like Frank Gehry or, many modern architects, it's really great that they can do so many styles, right? It's really a good thing, but back when Williams was practicing, it wasn't necessarily seen as a good thing, because you think of Frank Lloyd Wright. You think of those icons from that era, who was also a friend of Williams, right? You think of these architects who really had these really sort of distinctive, you think of Falling Water, you think of all of these very distinctive styles that they're known for. But Williams had to master many styles. Why? Because he was a businessman. Right? He was the businessman, and you come to his office, you have a dream about your space. Okay, you're a Hollywood executive, and you have this idea about a new home or a mansion or something. Okay, what, Spanish colonial? Right?
Or a French.
Or French colonial? Right? Yeah.
Well, this issue of style will be an interesting component in the narrative of Paul Williams. It's easy to see he is an eclectic architect, and using the word eclectic with a kind of negative meaning. Other architects of his time, they always said, what you do, you serve your client. I recently was reading about one of the major architect in Los Angeles who also worked with Paul Williams at a certain moment, Welton Beckett, always saying, first of all, I serve my client, and then I start my work. So it's another aspect. But we also want to say a lot about the people around him. This is another very interesting image that LeRonn will comment, but I want to say, you have seen his daughter in the image before. So the family, not only comes back, home in the evening, but the family is part, of his professional life. And she was definitely very important. His wife was definitely very important because was also part of the Black community. So you see how much this all multifaceted figura comes together, and it's one of the objectives we wish of this exhibition. And the previous images, this one, it's very relevant.
And so here's Paul Williams with the trustees of the Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Company building.
You
Right.
probably pass in front, I don't know how many times driving,
Right.
and you don't see it, it's there.
And so, so here we're dealing with Los Angeles as a divided territory, right? And the African American community, how do we get life insurance? How do we not get cheated on life insurance? How do we not, and so this during this particular era, and here we're dealing with legal and social segregation, we do it, we make companies, we save our money, we become entrepreneurs, and we actually form the companies that will service us, right? Because, so when people talk about, I'm saying segregation a lot, but what it means is that you pay your tax money on one level. You pay your taxes and you don't get what your taxes pay for, right? It means that African Americans are paying their taxes every year, but the taxes that go into keeping keeping the park open, that go into you being allowed to use that pool, that public facility, you did not have access to, even though you paid your taxes, right? And so here we're dealing with, a company, Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Company, that actually formed because we need to give people, poor people, even wealthy African Americans, we need to give you a life insurance. And so this company, and here we see him with the trustees, they're all dreamers. And when it comes to Paul Williams, he's one of the most well-known architects in Los Angeles. Why not get the best architect who's also African-American, but also can build a bridge through his buildings? So if a wealthy banker, right, can have it, Paul Williams design building, it connects that building, and Paul Williams connects it to the Black neighborhood here. And so here we see Paul Williams pointing toward that model with pride, right? Because it's something that really, really spoke to the progress that we were making in Los Angeles. And so when I say Paul Williams' life is actually an extension or a timeline of the 20th century, what happens when we get to, the 1970s in LAX, 1960s in LAX?
No, but you may also say, here you have, the board of trustees of the Golden. Actually, they became incredible patrons and one of the largest art collectors in Los Angeles. So we never think about, this community like really invigorating also the cultural life of Los Angeles and being part, being of course African American, but a much larger milieu, which of course, it's relevant for the architect, but generally speaking, it's relevant for the history of the city very much. When we talk about this and we think, oh, yes, the city of Los Angeles and Paul Williams, like other of his peers, but Williams being one exceptional protagonist, will really redefine the history of the city. I mean,
And you know, this is Los Angeles also, Los Angeles imagining itself, right? Structurally. Here's Paul Williams, the Mercedes-Benz showroom, and photography becomes so important, right? Because you see him, the rolled up sleeve, you see him with the pen, right? You know, when you think of like the Italian Renaissance, you see like the dukes and they point to their thing and then they have their thing and then the globe, right? I mean, this is within the tradition of visual communication, of one's ownership of one's practice or the world or what one owns. And so him, you know, he has an office to do some of this, you know, but here he is in the picture communicating that he is the master of this, right? And so Paul Williams, Mercedes-Benz, is also like a branding going on. Mercedes-Benz gives him the contract, or he earns the contract with Mercedes-Benz because they also recognize that he's someone dealing with architecture and design on the highest level, right?
great building.
Yeah, the YMCA, 28th Street YMCA. More than just, you know, exercise machines, and I'm just joking. But no, I mean, but these were social spaces in which African Americans had political meetings, right? And so this is at the same time, laterally, of the Harlem Renaissance and going on in New York. And here we see Paul Williams putting, in the medallions above, putting Frederick Douglass, right? Putting these African American, really, you know, important cultural figures inside the design of the building, because, you know, people like W.E.B. Du Bois and, you know, they would come to these spaces because they were social spaces, but there were also active spaces in which people had like graduations and things like that. So Paul Williams is deeply engaged with architecture across the cultural line, the racial line in Los Angeles. And what did it mean that this historical, again, 1921, right? He is part of the first LA Land Commission. 1915, he gets a contract to be, he gets his license to be a contractor. 1950, he's born in 1894. Understand what I'm saying here?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Think about this building now. Don't think about only about Paul Williams. You see it and you think, oh, there are several characters of what I would call an Italian palazzo. 15th century Florence, I mean, the symmetry, the balcony, and so on. And it's obvious that it's not only the Italian palazzo, but there are other examples in this country that you might have seen. I mean, think about a city that is considered white, but actually it's a black city like Chicago. I mean, architects like Sullivan were building exactly using the language in a certain way of the Italian palazzo, of the Renaissance, of the pediment. So it is a way to give you a strong personality, an identity. So architecture becomes a device, serves, I mean, who they are. Sometimes they are young kids that go to the swimming pool. Other times, I mean, there are a political, this is a YMCA, a political meeting. They have rooms. I mean, in a certain way, the functions are very simple, but the identity is given by the architectural language. I mean, this idea of a palazzo for, I mean, all this, in a certain way, very simple functions.
I took swimming lessons at the YMCA as a young child, I almost drowned. You bring all this back, Maristella. I can't.
Oh, yeah? Well.
But, you know, she's talking about being multilingual in architecture. Right? And so he's going back to the roots. He's going back to that style, right? The palazzo. And then, you know, what does it mean to be autodidact? I mean, we're dealing in a time here before MBAs, or you know what I mean? Like if you want to be a visual artist now, I mean now, let me go get my MFA. You know, before academic degrees defined practice, you had a whole generation of people who studied, who had personal libraries. And so Paul Williams being extremely, extremely talented and knowledgeable of the Italian Renaissance and Spanish colonial and French colonial and all of this means that, you know, he is studying because he knows that he needs to master these visual languages in order to have a practice, in LA.
Yeah.
Victor Rossetti, the banker.
Yeah, the banker.
The banker.
Banker patrons. I mean, it is interesting to think about who are among, I mean, his friends, peers, and so on. And more, I'm trying to go through this kind of listing, and I noticed that I can list, as we say, bankers, patrons, developers, important developers, I mean, collectors. So, I mean, I will do the same if I think about Frank Lloyd Wright or even Le Corbusier. I mean, without his patron being collectors, he would have never started his career. So, I mean, really, Williams belonged to the generation that were born at the end of the 19th century and really developed and grow in the 20th century. So I don't see a break between him and the other colleagues. I mean, they are different. I mean, architecture, it's always different. It's basically, they are not mimicking, they are not copying, but it's really, I mean, the way he is committed to the professional career and life is what, it's the same that you will write, and so far the architectural historians have been writing for the masters of 20th century architecture, without no one ever using this adjective or name master before for Paul Williams.
And Maristella, you're making me think of LA as a canvas.
Yeah,
right?
Excellent metaphor.
Right? As a canvas. And, architecture is a social art. You need space. Right? You're dealing with making something in real space. And so what does it mean? What does it mean to actually, painters, you're in your studio, you have your private time and you can be all, metaphysical within that studio space. But what does it mean to actually make the connections to make something in real space? Right? That means you have to work with city government. That means you have to work with contractors. You have to work with construction people. You have to, all of these different elements and funders, right? And funders. You really do have to work with all of these different aspects to make a house, to make a building. And so Paul Williams actually, he did start a savings and loan, right? Or he was part of the founding of a savings and loan, meaning that, if you can't get it from the outside, you have to make it for yourself. And if getting funding to make something is essential, that you're applying for these loans to make something and you're not getting what you need to ensure your vision, you start the seeds to do it for yourself. And so as much as we're talking about Paul Williams and his other associations, I think we're also like a sub-context of this is Paul Williams as someone who generated for himself in order to get these visions done to no small degree. This is his home.
This is his own house, I mean.
In Lafayette Square.
Lafayette,
Yeah.
yes. I mean,
Yeah.
Which was actually, I mean, it has been recently superbly restored. Some of his, architectural element in terms of language are all there. The stairs that goes to the upper level, the linai, the use of material, the changes of material. Again, a kind of canvas for different floors. It's very sophisticated, but it's also something that he achieved. And finally, in the 50s, he could build where he was not even allowed to visit, almost.
This is such a history lesson in terms of LA, a city of politics, and then we have city of architecture, and the two are actually really wed in really interesting ways. He could not live in many of the areas that he made buildings. He redesigned, he designed the crescent wing of the Beverly Hills Hotel, the design elements in it. He worked in terms of the palm trees and the leaves and things like that. That's also Williams. He has a suite inside the hotel, but he couldn't walk in the front door. Right? So we at the time. So
for us now, it's hard to imagine, but at least I think.
Well, we're also thinking, like, what is it? So the mental fortitude, right? The mental fortitude of a person who still carried on And so here we see his home, but we're also dealing with a history of land covenants in L.A. We run right into it. Asian American brothers and sisters, a lot of could not African Americans could not live in certain spaces in L.A. because in the deeds they were right. There were deeds you should not. No non-white person should have this home, right? So if you think of histories of a place like Leimert Park, that was all white. You think of certain spaces in Glendale, and so here's Paul Williams who's designing. He has over 300 structures in Bel Air and Beverly Hills. He has made over 3,000 structures, in L.A. Right, and yet he could not personally live in some of these places. So here, his home has these modern elements, his own imagination, and so you see some of the modern aspects. You could think of Corbusier and Villa Savoy. That kind of, but the industrial and it fits his imagination and the kind of modern living. But there's also that other side to it, the bittersweetness of it. Of it. And when you see this just feels like it's going to float off and fly away. It's like a spaceship almost. I think we have time for one more, Maristella, before questions if you have any.
Oh yeah, do we have time for questions? I mean, do we want to open?
You want to talk about? Is Columbia?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he had also a very international career. In the archive, we have been able to locate several, for instance, projects in Mexico, a relevant project, big, or in Colombia. This is the hotel in Medellin that it's still there, which is, in a way, a kind of interpretation of a Deco Beaux-Arts building again in the middle. It's the main square of Medellin, next to the cathedral. So it tells you that he had all the connection, probably to a group also of peers he worked, in Los Angeles. More and more we are investigating, for instance, who was the team for LAX, who were the team, for other major development project in Los Angeles. Of course, churches are all kinds of churches are extremely relevant, in his career. Here we see an unusual, that's the unusual photo of a church in Vegas. It's interesting how much churches are also part of his community. For the AME, he design all the and growing the installation and so on. The church had different location, and then he was part of the project for the fine. This is for those who has never been, maybe, to the Neon Museum in Vegas. This has nothing to do with the Neon Museum. It's one component of the entrance of a hotel that he designed, and it didn't exist. So they moved, this very Candela, I would say Felix Candela, the architect, volume design, and moved this at the entrance of the Neon Museum in Vegas.
So here he's dealing with a whole other. This is First AME.
This is First AME.
He redesigned First AME Church, opened 1960. The groundbreaking 1968.
Yes.
He and Danny Thomas were good friends. St. Jude's Hospital. Williams designed St. Jude's Hospital. He and Danny Thomas, great friends. The actor Danny Thomas, great friends. Founders, you recognize this building?
Yeah.
Here in LA.
Church.
Founders Church.
Korea.
And part of the design team for every time we come back to LA, right at LAX, Williams designed the parking structures at LAX.
Not the team building.
The team building, but this is a team building.
But this is a very nice. I mean, one aspect of the collection at the GRI is also related to the fact that in the archive we have the Schulman photos. The Schulman photos are an incredible repertoire of all Los Angeles architecture, mid-century modernist. I mean, going on, and of course he was very interested, I mean, in all what goes on, but also he was very keen in staging images. So this is a very well staged photos of Paul Williams, who was part of the team for the LAX, staging in front of the team building. But of course, I mean, Schulman has this eyes to capture also, I don't want to say the contradiction, but the idea, the desire. I mean, at the time he was working on a monorail, we discovered. I mean, equally adventures in terms of structure. So, I mean, in a certain way, this is like a picture of the many aspects.
And you know, 57, you're thinking about this, the Cold War space race, you know, Sputnik. Going into space and things like that. So to be a part of that as a design element, you can even look at like Bugs Bunny cartoons in the late 1950s, and the idea of the space race and space style, the Jetsons, all of that was sort of in the sort of cultural ethos.
Oh, yeah.
And here's Williams part of that same imagination. Now we're going, again, born in 1894. Right? And now here we are in the 1960s, and it's part of this imagination as well.
Yeah.
Public housing, right? Pueblo del Rio. So it wasn't just for the elite, right? Migrants to LA, right? And he had wrote a couple of books. Okay.
A couple of books, yes, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, Small House, Tomorrow. I mean, those are basically what I would say handbook that circulate. I mean, everywhere, simply to buy, not very expensive, where you see, I mean, how an architect try to give you the tool, the device, I mean, to build your own house, I mean, which is another idea of the post-World War II society.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Here we are. Questions. Oh, I already see a hand. You notice this has been a very much a conversation. I mean, we both have our, I mean, often, I don't want to say daily, but weekly meeting about Williams and the team, I mean, UCLA participating. So it's part of our life at this point.
No, thank you so much. I'm actually his great-granddaughter, so I wanted to just thank you for providing such a robust narrative around his work, both personally and professionally. Curious though, now you spent quite some time with these archives. Which are some of your favorite projects you've come across? If you don't mind sharing with the group. Here.
Do you have a favorite?
You know, very, very good. Thank you for coming, and very, really good to meet you. A wonderful legacy, absolutely. Beyond the projects, I think what we recently found were the lookbooks for his office. And they're in color. So a lookbook, you know, if you're thinking about a Paul Williams home or structure, you go into the office, and then you have these books that give you the range of his styles, right? You just flip through them. Not like you're shopping or anything like that, but you're not shopping, but you're just looking through them, and they are so well done and just colorful, and you get to see that, oh, he could do almost anything.
The variety of buildings, yes. I mean, from infrastructure, high-rise, mall, I would call, I mean, commercial, but also visionary idea. There is I have seen few times this image. I mean, it's a collage for reimagining Los Angeles at the very, very downtown, where there are a series of slabs, high rise. I mean, the idea that you are ready, I mean, to think, okay, Wilshire ends and downtown will become part of this new Los Angeles that we want to have. And he's not the only one in this kind of imagination. Lloyd Wright, the son of Frank Lloyd Wright, also has projects for re-envisioning downtown. So I would like to say that there are many ideas that he's sharing with others at that time, and the city is really the ground of the creativity.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. More questions, or ideas, or comments, or how much is a discovery? Stacy, you have a question, I'm sure.
I don't know. I think I'm too deep in it at this point.
Well, many of the questions that comes with the archive.
How many of you did not know about Paul Williams before coming here? Yeah. What are some of your thoughts about this introduction?
What's going to carry his legacy forward in the Black community? What's going to
Good question.
I would say that it's already there in terms of the people he's trained, in terms of those people having families and living with dignity, so on a basic employment level and training level, I think that there are architects that he trained. Paul Williams also redesigned Howard University, many of the buildings at Howard University.
Inside Washington, D.C.
Right? And so Paul Williams is all over the place, but I would say, like a great painter, who may have been in France in the 20s. You had people who did a sojourn. You had artists who just went and I'll travel across the sea to meet this person. And I think that is a history I would think it's already there in terms of, let's say if you think of First AME, the Mutual State building is still there. And, in LA, I think he has really helped define the infrastructure of Black LA, but also he and Karen Hudson, his grant, right? I mean, they also helped found a savings and loan. And so there's so many aspects to it that are beyond architecture that sort of live on. I think LA in and of itself should be indebted, right, really. But one of the things I hope we get from this exhibition is to make an awareness that it's kind of like, people want the sort of box-like homes now, these big box, but they don't know what they're destroying to get that home. And so there are Williams homes that are actually being torn down, right? Because of the way that LA real estate moves. And it's almost like having a library and having a book burned. Because architecture, again, is a public art. Can't be saved by a museum into a collection, right?
No, I mean,
Yeah.
when you are in an archive, the first thing you think, okay, I see the drawings, but architecture, the build, it's somewhere else. And very often you are not quick enough to list a building about among the building to be kept or safe, conservancy, all that. I mean, and this is a thread which we are also, notice happening. Happens quite often. Also, we think, few of you knew about Williams, others didn't know. One of the aim of the exhibition is to give William back to the city. It needs to belong to the city. It's one of the protagonists. So, it's now, safe, we can say, in a certain way, at least in terms of the drawings, the documentation. But when it's safe, it's when it's familiar to all of you, to the people that work on the road, that they will recognize. And I think this is one, at least for me, an important output of an archive, now listing more than 13,000, projects.
And it's also in plain sight. When you see the Beverly Hills Hotel, the writing, the neon writing, that's Williams, that's his handwriting.
This is his handwriting.
The Wilshire Hotel.
What I call a signature building.
Oh, that's, you see what I'm saying? It's also in plain sight in spaces that have lasted. You know, the Wilshire Hotel, he designed that. Right? Saks Fifth Avenue building. And so it's also, oh, okay, there are things that we pass by every day that he actually designed, but we don't know.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you guys. I think this has been a really, really cool picture of somebody who obviously has a legacy that's a bit larger than a single person in a sense. And I think, you know, given that you guys have spent so much time really, really looking at this individual with a magnifying glass, we're lucky enough to have a descendant here as well, which is incredible. I'm curious because this presentation has really sort of focused on his tenacity and his career. I'm interested, given, you know, the personal connections that a few of you in this room have, a little bit more about him personality-wise. You know, you talked about him coming home and a bit like that, and obviously the tenacity you have to have done what he's done. But I'm curious, you know, is he an extroverted person? Was he somebody who really leaned solely on his expertise to get his foot in the doors that he did? Or was this a person that was, you know, very extroverted, enigmatic, able to work people a bit? I'm just sort of curious to know him a little bit better.
You know, well, I mean, the one way I think about, or I've come to understand Williams, is through, okay, what does it mean to, just on a basic level, what does it mean to have an office and employ people for 40 years? Meaning generations of people that you've trained, not just in architecture, but, you know, Karen Hudson said, his granddaughter said she never saw him without pressed pants. That the people who worked in his office had to look a certain way because they represented him in the world, right? And so on a very basic level, there is something about him that says there is not just a tenacity, but yes, a tenacity, but also something about the stability of a person like that.
Also the charisma.
The charisma. You have to have, I mean, if you're hanging out with Frank Sinatra, you have to have, right? Because you walk into the room, okay, what shoes is he wearing? Like, you know, it's the Rat Pack. Like, you know, and so he had to be able to hang with them as well. And so, of course, there's an ego involved. I mean, architects and egos, I mean,
They go.
that's right? But he had to have that magnanimous part of him that could really impress people to, in some particular way, get to respecting his designs. Because if you don't know about architectural design, then it may not impress you. The built thing may impress you, but it may not impress you. The person impresses you, and then the thing impresses you. Right? In many ways. And so I would say, yes, he had that side to him. Yeah, you know, I mean, but you know, I think Karen said this to you as well. He was a great architect, but he was even a better grandfather. And she's his biographer, right? And so, I mean, these kinds of things that I think about in terms of who he was. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I can also add a bit of color here. It's Friday, so let's give some fun facts. He was a people person, and it was a people household. Like, it's full stop there. And one of the things that everyone, and obviously there's so much reverence for, we call them Dodd, but Paul Williams, but his wife was a light. I mean, she founded the Wilfendale Club, which is the oldest women's club in Los Angeles as a whole. And that's a space where, you know, people got married, people met, people had meetings amongst Black LA in the city. When you talk about what the impact in the Black community has been, I mean, they were a people's family and a people's household. And one of the things that my dad always tells me is, you know, he was working a lot, obviously, but he cared about the details of what was happening in his family's house. Like, he wanted to know what was happening at school. He wanted to know, you know, who his friends were. I remember my dad was torn between going to UCLA or going to the East Coast for school, and just sitting down with him in a room for hours and just kind of debating on, you know, what's not the best move in his eyes, but kind of talking him through like how to come to these, you know, big life decisions, and it mattered to him. And kind of on the fun side, he loved sweets. Like, literally, myself, and I have two sisters. Ty, my dear friend, also knows us very well. We all got our sweet tooth from him. I mean, the fridge was always stocked, like ice creams. The Marciano cherries were always in the building, like candies. My dad always says he doesn't remember seeing him often and not getting some kind of sweet treat. And he was a lot of fun. Like, I think he was very much, like, to Karen's point, like pressed pants, pressed shirt. I mean, you see some of the photos, they look like they can be out of a Ralph Lauren ad. But he was quite funny on it to kind of talk about the personal just stories in the family. And I don't know, one of my things that my dad told me quite often, he was like, he loved seeing people smile. And the reactions of drawing upside down was I think the professional story that has, you know, been more well known. But I think even just in the small moments, like, you know, seeing like Karen and Paul and my dad and his sister Gail, like horsing around in the yard, and you know, in the house there's the staircase has like these reindeers.
Yes.
Yeah, and you know, his wife would like break out Christmas decorations like you wouldn't imagine, and it would be so elaborate Christmas time. And you know, I think he got a lot of joy in seeing his family laugh and enjoy themselves. And I think that transcended into a lot of his relationships throughout LA as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You got your answer. Any other comment?
Well, thank you.
Thank you for joining us and for coming and for being here.